Matt Dixon, welcome to Built to Sell Radio. I'll try to do that again. Matt Dixon, welcome to Built to Sell Radio.
John, it's great to see you again. It's been a long time, but
it has been a long time.
Yeah.
We should give folks a little bit of context. I used to own a market research business that was acquired by CEB. You were running the sales practice at the time, and we got to know one another there. Gosh, it must be more than 15 years ago or something like that.
Yeah, it was a long time ago. Now I'm an avid listener of the show and love what you're doing out there. So,
that's super generous of you to say, but you are the world's expert in selling stuff. And a lot of our listeners are really good salespeople. Mm-hmm. They run companies where they are the best salesperson in the organization.
Or the only salesperson, right?
Yeah. They're the guru. And yet they've been told, maybe by this show, maybe by advisors, or even by the market, that they have to get out of doing the selling if they're going to create a company of any transferable value.
Yep.
And so I thought for the next little while, we just kind of riff on that problem. Have you ever seen that in your work?
I live that problem right now, actually, John. As a co-founder of a small boutique services firm, we're out there. Our business, DCM Insights, actually focused on teaching doer sellers. So think of partners in law firms, accounting firms, consultancies, executive search partners, investment bankers, people who sell advice, right? And try to teach them to be more effective commercially. And some of these folks, as you know very well, and I think a lot of your listeners can attest to this, are very deep subject matter experts, but they don't really get the commercial side of things. But we are a small business ourselves, and we've grown up. One of our co-founders is the primary rainmaker and salesperson for us, and that is the same exact advice we've been given by advisors, including some of the bankers and consultants we've spoken to. Is you got to scale this beyond the founder, right? So we have been working through this, and I think a lot of the research we've done sort of historically speaks into that problem. But it is a big problem, and it's one that I think you've seen this with some of your clients and your listeners, that a lot of founders really struggle with, that the business does well when they're the one carrying the bag and bringing in the business. But when they try to hand that baton off to somebody else, they suffer for it, and they don't know why. And it can be very, very frustrating to a founder, especially one who's built that pretty strong value proposition, strong product, a strong client base, to have the person you hand the baton to kind of stumble out of the gates.
Yeah, we call it the kind of, the rainmaker syndrome. The business grows as long as they're doing the selling.
Yeah.
And I think part of the challenge, I'd be curious to know if you've seen this, is that they rely on their industry chops, right? Like they've been in the industry since 1986 and they know everybody in the industry.
Yeah.
And they know every widget and every SIC code and like everything there is to possibly know about that industry. And although they probably take that for granted, that industry expertise brings them gravitas to the sales conversation.
Yeah.
What does your experience research tell you about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's for sure true. And I think one of the other points you made is the leveraging of your professional network. I think likely a lot of your listeners are built businesses that are predicated or built around their expertise they accumulated over the course of their career. And along with that accumulated experience is a big network, right? Professional network that they can harvest. And they, like you said, they have the gravitas, so that people take them seriously because of their experience. And that is one of the points that people struggle with, is when they bring somebody in who's from outside the industry, or maybe is earlier in their career. They don't have the accumulated years of experience and therefore don't have the network. How do I get them to tell our story in the way that I did? And I think, one of the things that I see with founders and early stage entrepreneurs is they see themselves a lot in the research. One of the books that you referenced in the intro, the Challenger Sale, is a story about what great salespeople do in a world in which customers can learn a lot about suppliers and their value propositions on their own. And they're increasingly want to push salespeople out and to force them to compete on price. When entrepreneurs and founders see that story, I think they see themselves in the challenger profile. And again, we could talk more about that profile and who they are and what makes them unique. But if you think about it, somebody's going out there and starting a business, they're either creating a market or they're stealing share from somebody else and trying to dislodge an incumbent. And the only way for these businesses to gotten to the point where they're listening to your show and now they're thinking about scaling and exiting in the next path in their growth trajectory is if they did challenge the customer and they did challenge the market. And I think that's especially painful for them when they see that those next folks that they pass the baton to can't do it as effectively. One of the things I've always found, though, is that, yeah, the subject matter expertise, the gravitas, the accumulated years of experience, and the network that you built up is really, really important. But what's actually even more important is that you're really tight on a couple of key questions before you then go and hire somebody to sell for you. Because all that other stuff you'll bring in business and you'll make it rain just because you are who you are and you know the people you know and you have the experience you have. But when you hand it off to somebody who doesn't have all of that, they're exposed, right? And so you've got to be able to answer a few key questions. The most important, I think, is why should your clients buy from you instead of your competitors? And this is something we talk about quite a bit in the Challenger sale. We call it the Deb Oler question because it was first coined by a woman named Deb Oler, who was the head of sales and marketing at a company called Grainger, a big North American distribution company.
Sure.
And Deb said their whole journey to scale their sales organization started with answering that question. And I think what you find is that when you ask that question of founders, a lot of times they'll go to kind of platitudes or knee-jerk kind of generalizations like, oh, well, John, we're extremely client-centric. We're very entrepreneurial. We're, very socially responsible. Those are all great things, but those are not actually none of those things make you unique. And we actually, John, you probably remember this when we were at CB, we did some research about how business-to-business vendors, including a lot of services companies, describe themselves. And this may not surprise you, but it turns out like 90% of the players in any given market describe themselves as the leading solution provider of fill in the blank, which by definition can't be true, right? But we all use the same words to describe what we do.
It's like 90% of drivers think they're above average.
Yeah, it's like Lake Wobegon, right? So I think, what Deb pointed us to was this idea that everything in terms of scaling sales and marketing starts with your ability to answer that question. And the answer to the Deb Oler question, why should your clients buy from you instead of your competitors, is always, it has to be a specific thing that you do, that your firm does. It's a product you make that is better, faster, cheaper than your competitors' products, or interoperates more with other things that they use. It's the way you deliver your services or your value to the client. It could be the way it's priced. It could be the way you tie in with other providers. It could be almost anything, but it has to be something demonstrable. It has to be credible. It has to be valuable to the client. It has to be true that you're the only one who actually does this and nobody else can do it. And the litmus test is this: if you were able to answer that question, really kind of distill it down to the like its true essence. Say, boy, I know we do X and all of our competitors do Y, and we just need to get people to pay for X and pay a premium for X over Y. That you've crystallized the answer, but here's the litmus test: is could you actually take your logo off of the sales pitch deck and hand it out to all of your competitors' salespeople? And would they go tell these stories and use that pitch deck to sell to clients? And would those clients still come back and buy from you? No, obviously nobody's going to do that. But that's really what we're talking about here, is that you've created and defined what your unique value prop is. You've kind of isolated that category of one, and you've gotten so sharp on that. And then you've got to build messaging and sales collateral that all leads to that value proposition. And there's a big difference between that and what a lot of entrepreneurs and founders try to do, which is lead with their value proposition. Let me tell you everything about us, how many offices we have, how long we've been around, how we've grown so rapidly, all of our marquee clients that we do business with. That's leading with your value proposition versus leading to it. And so getting that motion right, really, again, it starts with a couple basic questions. But once you've answered that question, I want to say everything else is easy, but it all starts there. If you can't answer that question in a crystal clear way, you're getting way ahead of yourself thinking you can hire somebody else to sell the way that you have.
I love this concept. And I want you to go back to something you just shared. And maybe for me and the equally slow-minded people in the audience, you said something leading with your value proposition versus leading to your value proposition. Yeah. I didn't quite get that.
Sure.
Can you just say it in a different way?
Yeah. So maybe I'll describe it in a framework way and then maybe give you an example. So what a lot of companies do, if you pick up any sales pitch deck that used by any salesperson selling almost anything in B2B, whether it's a product or a service. Usually it has the same first 4 slides. It's your mission and values on the first page. You're entrepreneurial, you're client-centric, you're socially responsible, all that good stuff. You're the leading global solution provider in your space. The second thing is it's got the logos of your products and solutions. And this is for many B2B companies, the brand of the company is less well known than the product they sell or the service they deliver, which has its own brand name. The third slide is usually the marquee list of clients, the people who've trusted you with their business. And the fourth slide is usually a map and a little bit of a history, a map with the dots on it showing how many offices you have, and a bit of a history lesson about your company, the awards you've won, so on and so forth. And people usually laugh, just like you are about that. What I think is interesting about that is all about leading with your value proposition, like leading with the things that you think make you unique. But I would actually say, even more to the point, it's not just that it comes at the beginning of the sales pitch deck versus the end. It's that a lot of the stuff the terms we use and the ways we talk about ourselves and what we think makes us unique actually makes us feel more like the same to our customers. At the end of the day, customers don't perceive a lot of difference between us and our top competitors. And so really, again, that's why answering that Deb Bowler question and getting really sharp on the thing you do or the thing you make or the way you deliver your service and what makes it truly distinct, and then putting that at the end of your pitch deck, then what goes at the beginning is a conversation about the client and what's going on in their world. And ideally, you're starting with an insight, something that they need to know, right? That reframes the way they think about their own needs in a way that they're looking around. And the question they ask after you blow their mind with your unique insight, they say, boy, who could help me with that? Well, let me tell you more about who we are and what we do, what makes our company truly unique. Getting that right is really, really hard, right? But that is the difference between leading with and leading to. Is leading with is a whole bunch of stuff about us. Leading to is a whole bunch of stuff about the client in their market and what they're dealing with that eventually winds its way to how we can help them accomplish the things that they're trying to accomplish.
Can you, and I think what you're referring to there in a description is the initial kind of architecture of the challenger sale, where you're leading that conversation with some unique insight in stage 2 or step 2 about them that hopefully they didn't know going in.
Yeah, that's right.
Maybe for folks who have been living under a rock for the last 20 years and haven't read the Challenger Sale, maybe you can just give me like 60 seconds on what it is so folks know, and then I've got some follow-on questions.
Yeah, absolutely. So Challenger Sale was a large global study of sellers, and we found, this is going back now to 08, 09, generally, I think sales leaders were finding their salespeople were struggling with the old techniques of going in and asking the customer what's keeping you up at night, and what's known as solution selling. They were struggling with that, and I think what they started to find is that customers were trying to box their salespeople out. They're engaging salespeople later and later in the purchase journey. In fact, our data showed that the average customer is about 60% of the way through the purchase journey before they ever pick up the phone and call the supplier they end up buying from, which, what that means is that the customer's already decided, what am I trying to accomplish? Who should be on my short list? Which vendors should I consider working with? I put it all in an RFP, and then I force them to compete on price. That puts a salesperson in a really tough spot. And so we asked this question, which is, what are the best salespeople doing differently in a world in which the customer can learn on their own? And what we found in a large global study is that salespeople basically fall into one of 5 different profiles. You've got relationship builders. These are the very likable, affable, generous salespeople, but the folks are really good at finding out what's keeping the customer up at night and then addressing that need. You've got challengers. Challengers, they're more about pushing the customer's thinking, bringing the new ideas to the table, helping them think of new ways to make money, save money, mitigate risk, et cetera. Got hard workers. Hard workers are very numbers focused. As long as I have enough opportunity in the pipeline and I follow the sales process, I should hit my number at the end of the year. Lone wolves march to the beat of their own drummer. No notes in the CRM system. They use their own. They don't use the collateral you bill for them. They sell stuff you don't actually make. All that good stuff. And then the last one's the problem solver. Problem solver is kind of a more of a customer service rep in salesperson's clothing. And what we found in this large scale study is that when you look at performance, while there are 5 kind of profiles, they're not created equal in terms of performance. In fact, when you look at high performers, almost 40% of them fall into the challenger profile. This kind of sharp-elbowed, provocative, come in and reframe the way the client understands what their needs are. And the lowest performer, the smallest chunk of the high performers, were these relationship builders. Again, these are the folks who are classically doing what we always thought great salespeople did. Find out what's keeping the customer up at night and address what's keeping them up at night. But what it showed us is that in a world where customers can learn on their own, they don't want you to ask them what's keeping them up at night. They want you to challenge their thinking, show them what should be keeping them up at night, and do it in a way that justifies you as a vendor who can help them accomplish that objective, right? So this is even more pronounced if we're selling complex products and services. But this book came out in 2011, and we've continued to collect data and study this phenomenon. I think last count was there's 200 or 250,000 salespeople in the data set right now, and it continues to point to this idea that bringing insight, bringing new ideas to your customer, that is what wins preference, and that is what creates loyalty, and that is what drives high conversion rate, premium price sales, et cetera.
I've got so many questions. I love the analogy of sharp elbows because I think a lot of entrepreneurs will relate to that idea that, hey, they've got a point of view on the world. It's different than the prevailing point of view. They're going to go in and convince you that they are correct and that you should follow them to the promised land. And we started off by asking, okay, well, it's no guff that entrepreneurs are good at the challenger sale, whether they know that's what they're doing or just doing it by nature. Yet trying to get juniors, underlings to adopt it has been challenging for some. I love the Deb Oler. Am I pronouncing her
name correctly?
Yeah. Okay, that's the first step. So you as the founder need to do some homework, right?
Yeah.
You need to give your salespeople the 3 bullets, like why you should buy from us, very clear and very compelling fashion, so that you're at least arming your underlings with that information. What else can they do to adopt the challenger sale kind of research into a small entrepreneurial company?
Sure. Yeah. So the first question, you nailed it, is that Deb Oler, is it answering the Deb Oler question. What is the reason the customer should buy from you instead of all of your competitors, or do nothing, right? Which is often our biggest competitor. I think the second question is, what would have to be true for the customer to want to pay you for that unique benefit, right? It's all well and good to have a unique benefit, but if there's, you're not actually solving a problem worth solving for the customer, then they're not going to be willing to pay you for it. I can maybe illustrate quickly with, this is a pretty good example and a short one, but there's a company out there, Corporate Visions, who does a lot of this kind of message creation work with companies. And they've got a great client example they talk about a lot from Volvo Trucks. I use this one because I think we can all relate to it, right?
Sure.
Not that we are truck drivers, but we've all been on the highway with the big rigs. And Volvo Trucks is one of the biggest manufacturers of the big rigs, long haul trucking equipment. For a very long time, it was a very lead with product focused sale. So their sellers would come into the fleet operators office. It could be at UPS, FedEx, any number of logistics kind of operators. Go in and they would lead with all the features of the truck. Did you know the new by the way, all your listeners are going to know I know nothing about trucking, but I'm making this up. They come in, they say, John, you're the fleet operator, I'm the salesperson. I want to tell you about the new Volvo XP9000 truck, which has the biggest windshield in its class, 30% larger than its competitors. It's got the most comfortable sleeper cabin and ergonomically designed cockpit. Just a pleasure to sit in for 8 hours long and drive down the highway across Canada or across the U.S. It's also got an early warning system, so it can tell the truck driver when a critical system or part is about to fail, so they can pull over for service. And invariably, while all those things were true, invariably the question that Volvo would get from fleet operators is, how much does it cost? And when they told them it costs like 20% more than the competitors' trucks, they'd say, don't let the door hit you on the way out. Like, I don't need all that fancy stuff, right? It's a truck is a truck. And these companies run on pretty thin margins. So what they did is they reframed the way they talk about it. In a way that leads to all those benefits. So now they come in and they would sit down and say, John, we've not met each other before. You're operating a big fleet. You got lots of trucks. Maybe a few questions about your operations. I'd love to actually have a conversation with you about driver turnover, which is an HR problem, right? Losing the cost to your business of having unfilled routes in open headcount, and what that means for your business. And your first thought is, you sell trucks. You're not an HR consultant. What the heck are you asking about? But okay, I'll indulge you. And we start to get into it, and we do a little bit of math around how much it costs to have an open headcount on the team and an unfilled route, what that means for your customers, what that means for your business, your operations, your finances, et cetera. Ends up it costs a lot of money. Then I will drop my insight, my challenge or insight on you, which is, a lot of times I find fleet operators assume the trick to solving the turnover problem is to just pay their drivers more and maybe provide better benefits. After all, that's why drivers leave, for a little bit more money from a fleet operator down the street. But our research shows that the number one driver of, no pun intended, the number one cause or driver of truck operator engagement and satisfaction is not pay and benefits. It's actually satisfaction with the equipment they operate. And it also turns out that Volvo trucks are the most preferred trucks of professional truck drivers. Why? Because we're the safest truck on the road. Part of that is our panoramic windshield, 30% bigger than our next closest competitor, allows them to see all those crazy amateurs out on the road. Because as a professional, you're surrounded by people who don't do this all day long, and safety is your priority. Two, being a truck driver is hard, and you're sleeping in the back of the truck in the sleeper cabin. You're sitting in that chair for 8 hours a day on these long haul routes across Canada, and you want to feel comfortable. And our truck shows to the driver that we care about your well-being and your welfare, right? Your health and wellness while you're doing this hard job. And then lastly, the bane of the truck driver's existence is when something breaks on the truck and they miss their son or daughter's basketball game because they're sitting on the roadside waiting for maintenance to get towed to a truck stop. Our truck has an early warning system that shows the truck driver what's about to go down and what's about to break so they can get it fixed in advance and still make it home for family night. So what we can show you is that fleets that operate Volvo trucks actually have a demonstrably lower driver turnover than fleets that don't. Now suddenly, so if I took a step back, so you see the difference between leading with and leading to. I'm leading with the features and the shiny truck, but I'm still selling the same exact thing. It just comes at the end of the sales conversation, not at the beginning. And it's now solving a business problem that all of the competitors' trucks can't solve, right? Because I've answered that Deb Oler question, which is what do we make and what do we deliver and sell that our competitors don't? And so I think it hopefully gives you a little bit of a sense, but I think for an entrepreneur or founder, it can feel like a high bar, but unless you can get to that kind of concrete, really sort of tight explanation for here's the thing we know about our customer's business, how to make money, save money, mitigate risk, steal market share, engage customers, employees in new and different ways. And here's how it ties very tightly to what we sell. And we can create that category of one. You're not really in a position to go scale your sales efforts, because then if you send people into battle without that, then you're just hoping that they have the same network and the same experience, same gravitas that you have. But they really don't in most cases. They need to be armed with something, and that's really what you got to arm them with.
I love this. It's putting, unfortunately, for our listeners, the onus back on them to really articulate not only why customers should buy from you, but also what would have to be true in order for that to make the decision making easy. And in your Volvo example, what would have to be true is turnover would have to be a significant enough problem for a fleet operator in order to really want to stem turnover.
Absolutely. In that case, the truck costs 20% more, but you're solving a much bigger problem for me.
Sure.
No problem.
Yeah. I want to go back to something you said earlier, because I think it bears repeating and maybe digging in a little bit more. Whenever I ask that question of a group of entrepreneurs, invariably, the question you raised at the very beginning, which is why should clients buy from you, or why should customers buy from you? Invariably, I hear, well, we offer the best customer experience. We offer the best customer support. Yeah. And they look at me through the whites of their eyes and they will defend that value proposition to their death.
Yeah.
No, we offer the best customer service. Yeah. No, well, if you understood our industry, you'd know that we were the strongest in our industry. No. Yeah. Look, I understand you're a marketing guy. You need to have a value proposition, but we don't, because we offer the best customer. And they will argue vehemently that is their value proposition, customer experience. Why is that not a value proposition that scales?
Yeah, I think it's one that is almost impossible to measure into value for a customer. So I think Deb, just to go back, she said she had these meetings which were very uncomfortable. Early on, she started asking this question, and people would other executives would start avoiding her when they saw her coming down the hallway, because she knew that the next thing hey, Bob, have you thought about the answer to the question, why should our customers buy from us instead of our competitors? And she said why she got so much, maybe flack or create so much tension internally is that people would immediately go to things like, well, we deliver the best customer experience, Deb, or we're the most innovative. And she would press back and say, well, how much better of a customer experience is it? It's like 2% better, 5%. By the way, how did you measure that? What does that mean in dollar terms for our customer? And then people would kind of shuffle papers and fake an illness and because you can't measure it. And it's not anything that you can actually put a dollar value on. That's you've really got to be able to isolate the thing that you make or you do or the way you deliver the product, and then point back to what does that mean in dollar terms for the customer? What problem are you solving? Sometimes it's a problem they didn't know they had, right? Or maybe it's a problem they did know they had, like the driver turnover problem Volvo is addressing, but you are pointing to a solution that they didn't realize, or a connection between two things that they thought were totally disconnected: the quality of the rig and the driver's engagement and propensity to leave. They didn't realize these two things were connected, and you just connected it for them. That then leads to you. I hear this all the time from folks that, it's our brand, it's our customer experience, our tremendous service, our long history, these sorts of things. A really easy visual for people to think about. If listeners had a piece of paper, I'd encourage you to draw 3 circles in a Venn diagram. So you got one on the top, one on the left, one on the lower right. The top one are your customers' needs. So these are things your customers know that they need, and maybe some things they don't yet know that they need, but you know they need, right? But your customers' needs in the top circle. The lower left is your competitors and how their capabilities and how those capabilities address the client's needs. The lower right is your capabilities. Now, what I find a lot of people will end up doing is they'll go right to the area of overlap between those 3 circles. But Deb called this, she taught us this framework. She called that RFP land, because that means that you and your competitor are equally capable of addressing the client's need. And so now it's a race to the bottom on price. The lowest cost provider always wins that business. What you got to figure out is what's the area of overlap between what you can do and what the client needs, but it is not shared with your competitor. That's the area of competitive differentiation. That's the answer to the Deb Older question. It sits right in that area of overlap. And figuring that out is really hard. And it requires a great way to do it is go out to your customers, those customers who do keep coming. Well, oftentimes, I think customers keep coming back to us, but we don't really know why. We think it's because we're delivering a great client experience. But actually, when you dig a little bit deeper and you spend some time with them, you realize they're buying your service or your product for a different reason, maybe one that you yourself, even though you started the business, didn't fully appreciate. And so really digging deep there to find out what is it that our truly loyal customers know about us that we wish everybody knew about us. And oftentimes it's not, our customers are smart people too. It's not some platitude that they're buying us for. It's something very specific. And then taking that and going and testing it with other customers, and then testing it with prospective customers and seeing if that idea resonates with them as well is a great way to do it. Another tip I'd give you is, to the extent that you do have salespeople, you probably have a difference between some of your high-performing salespeople and then everyone else, is spending some time with your high performers to hear how they talk about the company's value proposition. Because Challenger is nothing that we invented. It was just a way of selling that high performers were using, and they'd figure it out on their own. We just kind of documented it and backed it with data and gave a name to it. And chances are there's somebody in your organization who is selling circles around everyone else. Go figure out how they're talking about your company with your customers.
It's such an interesting insight. The other one that I've seen done, in fact, we did it at Value Builder, is first did a Net Promoter Score survey with our customers, and then asked everybody what their primary value proposition is, or like, in other words, why do you buy from us effectively? And we found one theme that was overwhelmingly across all customer segments, the reason people buy from us. But what was really cool was our promoters, the ones who gave us a 9 or a 10, were about twice as likely to say that's why they buy from us. And the least satisfied customers were much less likely to relate to that value proposition. Yeah. So not only was the value proposition clear overall, but polarizingly clear when we looked at it by level of satisfaction in the customer base.
Yeah, it can be very eye-opening to do that kind of research. And then, I think you're also hitting on something else, which is it does start with the sales conversation, but you got to pull that string through in the way you deliver the product or service, and the way you address customer issues, and the way you have that renewal or that expansion conversation. And it has to be this drum you keep beating. And I think that's in some ways part of the explanation is that maybe we had a powerful challenger story leading to this insight right up front, but then we kind of lost our way a little bit. And not surprisingly, some of our customers don't really fully appreciate that that's what makes us unique. And then unfortunately, come renewal time, they lump us in with the other customers and they start forcing us to compete on price and say, well, you guys are kind of expensive and maybe we'll go over here. But if they really did value what it is that makes you unique, you probably wouldn't be in that conversation to begin with.
Yeah, it's such a good point. And the challenger sale, again, a lot of our listeners would certainly have heard of it. Many would have read it. And because it has become really, spin selling was the 90s and the first millennium, and then the challenger sale really has become the de facto kind of, at least in my world, sales instruction manual. So congratulations on everything that has accomplished for.
I'll tell your listeners a funny story for those who do know the challenger sale. This will be especially funny for you. But John, when we wrote the book, I worked at CEB, and so that was work for hire when we worked at CEB. And I remember a few years after the book came out and it started to kind of take off and catch in the market. And we were at one of our member meetings I was running the sales practice, as you said. So we were with a bunch of CSOs, and we were in Philadelphia. And because it's a bunch of heads of sales from big companies, they want to go to the bar after the meeting and the dinner. Surprise, right? So we're shutting the bar down. It's pretty late. It's like 2 a.m. And there were about 12 sales leaders left, and they kind of I was there with my co-author Brent Adamson, and we were hanging out, and they kind of came from the bar and kind of encircled us, and they started grilling us about the challenger. And one of these guys, who shall remain nameless, I think he's retired now, but I was head of sales for a big industrial products company, Fortune 100 company, and said, I was talking to some of the other folks here at the bar, and this challenger thing's really taken off. Did CEB give you guys a bonus for writing that book? And I said, well, there was an advance for the book, but it went to CEB because it's CEB's IP. And I said, okay, well, I can appreciate that, but you guys get royalties, right? And I said, no, actually, CEB gets those too. And the head of sales goes, way to go, challengers. And then they all turned around and left. So, look, John, I write about this stuff. Doesn't mean I'm particularly good at it personally. So.
That's so good. You're dead to me. That's awesome. Oh, that's awesome. That's so good. Let's kind of build on challenger sale because as in your own mission, 2008, 2009 was when a lot of the research was done. Obviously, a lot of water under the bridge since then. I'm a huge fan of the book Jolt, which was the one I think immediately before the one you're working on now. Maybe describe what's changed since the challenger sale and what was the kind of genesis behind the book Jolt?
Yeah, Jolt had the Jolt came out. Jolt Effect came out in fall of 2022. So
you do get royalties on this one.
I do. Yeah. So yeah. Thank you for. I did it to myself, but you have every right to bring it up. But yes, we corrected that mistake in future editions. Let me take a step back. I think there are 3 big challenges that are facing salespeople today. I think the first one we just spoke about at length, which is my customers doing all their own research. They're deciding what they want to do. They're deciding who they should do it with. They're even making decisions about how we compare to our competitors. And then they're forcing us to compete on price. And a lot of times we lose deals before we even know those deals were an opportunity, right? We didn't make the short list. And so then somebody else won the deal and, it's too late. But Challenger's sort of the solution, if you will, to that problem. What do we do in a world where customers can learn on their own and box us out? We teach them the thing they couldn't learn on their own. There's a second problem, which we wrote a book about called The Challenger Customer. That came out in 2015, which is, look, a lot of times, I think your listeners can attest to this, it's not one person in the customer organization I've got to convince. I got to get the whole buying committee on board. And in a small business, that may be a couple co-founders or a couple of executives. In a big company, that could be, 10, 20, 30 people who've got to weigh in. And it can be like herding cats. So Challenge Our Customer is really a story about how do we forge consensus and get dysfunctional buying groups to agree on something more than do nothing. The third problem is what the Jolt effect is about, which is the rise in no decision losses. And I'll tell you how we came upon this problem, but I'll just share a little bit of data. We found in a large global study that anywhere between 40 and 60% of a salesperson's qualified pipeline will ultimately be marked as close lost, no decision, meaning we spend a lot of time and energy, a lot of organizational resources pursuing opportunities that just basically evaporate. They don't close. We don't ever get a clear yes or no, but they basically go radio silent on us and they just disappear into the ether. And eventually somebody says, just stop throwing time and energy after this thing. Just mark it as closed loss, no decision, but we don't know why. And we've noticed a market increase in those types of losses. The reason we studied this, though, it was funny because we remember the heady days of March of 2020 when the world went into COVID lockdown. Everyone's watching Tiger King and learning to bake sourdough bread and, the good times. Because I'm a huge nerd, as John already knows this, but because I'm a research nerd, I thought, boy, this is an interesting time for sales because, we all know in B2B, we had started using Zoom and Teams and WebEx more, but March of 2020 was the moment where nobody was invited into the client's office. Nobody was getting in rental cars. Nobody was getting on airplanes, and everything went virtual literally overnight. And the problem with studying real sales conversations, unless you want to do what Neil Rackham did around spin selling back in the 80s, which is physically send researchers out to sit in offices listening and taking notes as sellers are pitching their customers, unless you want to get somebody to fund that piece of research, which nobody turns out wants to fund, the only way you could do it is if you could record all the sales conversations. And that wasn't actually possible until March of 2020. So we recruited several dozen companies from across industry and geography into a large global study that ran about 18 months. And we asked them, for the purposes of a research study, could you send us all of your recorded sales calls? Because they're all happening on Zoom. So all you have to do is hit record. Some companies do this automatically in the background. Some of them ask permission and record. But we collected all these 2.5 million sales recordings. And we had this inkling that, no decision losses was the thing we wanted to study. So we kind of pointed our research laser at this question of, across 2.5 million calls, why is it that customers make no decision? Like, it's frustrating for us as salespeople, but it's also puzzling. What would cause a customer to go through an entire sales process with us to just do nothing? Seems like a huge waste of their time too. And then more importantly, what is it the best salespeople do to avoid that outcome, which is very, very costly, especially when you think of 40 to 60% of your deals are going to wind up lost to no decision. If we could solve for that somehow across a sales organization, that is a massive return and a huge productivity boost for a sales team. So that was the provenance of that book, The Jolt Effect, which again, just came out a couple of years ago. So,
yeah, and it's a great book. One of the concepts I absolutely like. I highlighted it. I wrote on the margin of the book, and I sent it to the people that run our sales. Was this notion of minimizing customer expectations. Because I think there's an inclination, especially among maybe entrepreneurial companies, to maybe overstate or embellish the success of their product.
Yeah.
And this research pointed to doing exactly the opposite. Can you describe the impact of managing expectations? I think this is so fascinating.
Yeah, I think understanding why no decision losses kind of happen requires that we maybe take a step back and think about a little bit our own psyche, and we go into spend a lot of time. This from reading the book. We spend a lot of time talking about the difference between status quo bias, which I think all listeners are familiar with that, right? That's just the customer is lazy; they don't want to change. They're going to stay where you go. It's inertia, right? It's easier to do nothing. And we deal with that all the time in sales, but there's a difference between that and what researchers call the omission bias. Status quo bias is basically laziness and inertia, as you said. Omission bias is our deep-seated fear as human beings to avoid making a mistake and being blamed for that mistake. Now, what's so interesting is that the omission bias is actually psychologically a more powerful effect than the status quo bias, but because they both end up in the same place, which is making no decision and keeping doing the same thing. In sales, we always assume it's because the customer is wedded to their status quo. And so what do we do in sales? Well, we try to dial up the FOMO, right? John, let me tell you again about all the phenomenal benefits that you're going to forego if you don't say yes and sign this agreement. Or John, let me try to create that burning platform, dial up the fear, uncertainty, and doubting, make you squirm a little bit. All your competitors are using our platform, our service, and you're not, and you're going to be left in the dust. And those problems, John, are not going to solve themselves. So make you feel the heat. And if those two things don't work, usually what salespeople resort to is like the 10% discount that's only good this quarter, right? I want to try to create some urgency. But those are all FOMO reasons, dial up the fear of missing out. You miss out on these benefits, miss out on solving this problem, or just miss out on this discount I'm willing to offer you today. And what we found is that a lot of those techniques actually backfire with customers. And the reason is it's because of the omission bias. It's not that they're worried about missing out. What they're worried about is messing up. And so we say to salespeople, you got to remember the FOMO, the fear of messing up, is actually more powerful for your customer than the FOMO. The not safe for work version is FOFU, but I'll let your listeners figure out on their own what that stands for. One of the big ones, and you hit it, John nailed this one. It's one of the ones it actually turns out statistically was the most important one, was the customer's fear that they won't get what they expect. I'm signing up with you. You've gotten me off the fence. You've convinced me to move forward. I'm going to sign up with your company, and you've projected these really, really lofty ROI expectations, right? There's cost savings, revenue generation, risk mitigation, et cetera. And I am about to put my name on this agreement. I'm going to take it to my boss, and I'm going to ask them to approve it. And then all eyes are on me because this is a lot of money for my company. It's a big leap we're taking and is predicated on us getting this lofty return you've been talking about. And if that doesn't happen, heads are going to roll, and it's going to be my head that rolls first. You know why? Because it's my name on the agreement, And so this is that FOMO that starts to take over. And so what we found is statistically speaking, the most powerful thing you could do is properly set expectations up front. Now, what I think a lot of entrepreneurs are hearing is, well, look, we've got client success stories on our website. We've got proof points and testimonials we show in our sales pitch deck right now, and we should keep using those things. And those things paint a very rosy picture. But what happens when the customer says, boy, I'm making this up, but let's say you sell a sales productivity solution and your customer comes to you and says, I love that case study on your website. You're telling me that you guys can generate a 10x improvement in sales productivity? The average salesperson is thinking, if that's exciting to you, I'm not going to talk you out of that because that's going to get you to go to the CFO and get approval on this thing, and away we go. But what great salespeople understand is that is a recipe for a late stage stall because those are really hard to achieve outcomes. And so what they'll do is exactly what you said, John. They will say, we absolutely stand by that case. In fact, I worked on that deal there. But what you need to understand about that is everything went right. They resourced it to the hilt. They had total planetary alignment. It dovetailed beautifully with their other initiatives internally. Our system interoperated with all their other systems. No hiccups, no landmines we stepped on, nothing bad happened. And we all know that sometimes things happen. What I would tell you is that we should think about probably a 5 to 6x improvement in productivity. Why? Because we see that at least that in 100% of our implementations, and everything beyond that is gravy. Now, based on what I've seen, I'm pretty confident we're going to do better than 5 to 6x, but I know your CFO is going to be excited by that. That way, if all we get is 5 to 6x, you've delivered on your promise. And if we do better, you're a hero. Right? And I'd rather set you up for success. What I don't want you to do is have you put your name against a 10x and know that everything needs to go perfectly for us to achieve that. I know it's possible, but it's a lot of pressure on you, and that's not the position I want you to be in. So and that is like anathema to the average salesperson. Why would I ever tell the customer to expect less? But your great salespeople know that is the key to getting that deal over the line, because when they're looking at that 10x number and they're looking at the agreement, their name's on the agreement, and it's got to go to their boss. That is a recipe for getting ghosted in the late stages.
Yeah, this is such an important insight. And I think, again, to the extent that we're arming younger, less experienced people with less gravitas, they're even more susceptible to be questioned, right? Like, who are you telling me 10x? That seems a little outlandish. I know you got it on their website, whereas, the owner has pre-existing gravitas and experience and trust.
Absolutely.
And we're trying to get, juniors to be able to make sales. And so this is such an important point. I can't remember what page it's in Joel, but it's worth the whole book. The whole book there's a ton of insight throughout. So the one thing I wanted to kind of end with is this kind of concept of how what we're talking about today applies to service companies. Because, while we have a whole wide range of listeners, some folks that run car dealerships and others that have, widgets and products that need to be shipped, we have a disproportionate number of people that run service companies. Whereas David Ogilvy said, the assets go up and down the elevator every night. It's the people that I'm offering. And I think that proves to be even more challenging, because at least with a widget, you can the salesperson can bring it out and say, look, it's
touch it, feel it, test it.
It feels great. Yeah. It goes well. But in a service company, it's even harder to get other people doing the selling. What are you learning about service companies?
Yeah, it's funny you should ask. So we just wrapped up a big piece of research. It's actually going to be the subject of the new book, which comes out in the spring from Harvard Business Review Press. The tentative title is The Activator Way. Though, because the publishers do what publishers do, it may change. But there's a good summary of that research actually in the November-December HBR the article is called What Today's Rainmakers Do Differently. And so we did a large study. The initial data set was about 1,800 partners from a variety of professional services. So it was accounting, law, investment banking, management consulting, executive search, communications and PR, et cetera. And we did this large study because I think, to your point, I'll tell you just as a bit of an autobiographical story, but when I was out in the early years of Challenger, getting invited to speak at sales kickoffs and different events all the time. And I had this experience where I was invited to go speak at a large consulting firm, and their topic for the year was business development effectiveness. Somebody must have told the managing partner, there's this exciting new book called The Challenger Sale. You should invite the author. So I came out and I was stopped in a room full of 400 partners. So these are doer sellers, right? It's people selling advice, just like the Ogilvy, the assets going up and down the elevator, services business. And I got stopped about 45 minutes through my hour-long keynote where I was talking about Challenger, and the managing partner said, you keep talking about sales and sales effectiveness and selling, but you've got to understand, we are not salespeople. There's not a single salesperson in this entire ballroom. And we, in fact, don't sell anything here. And I remember that Neil Rackham, who wrote the foreword to Challenger, actually had a similar experience many, many years ago presenting spin selling. And I just used the line that he used and hoped it would work the same way, because I don't know if I had the same sense of humor as Neil. But I said, okay, I was worried you might say that, but let's just stipulate to the fact that there's a mysterious process by which the client's money ends up in your firm's bank account. Can we just call it sales? But and everyone laughed, and that was great. But actually, it told me that, look, this world of selling, where you're not selling a product, but you're actually selling yourself and your own intellect, your own advisory skills and experience, which, as you said, you can't touch and feel that. Like, you can't test it, you can't demo it, you can't do a proof of concept trial. You can't return it. It's a black box purchase. And what partners and services folks do is very different. They're not just selling the work, but they're delivering the work. And then they got to solve all the client problems too. They're like the entire org chart rolled up into one person: sales, marketing, customer support, delivery, product, et cetera. And so we did this large study. Again, it was in that, check out that HBR article or the forthcoming book. And we actually found there are 5 different profiles of partners in professional services. You've got experts. Experts are the people who, in the shorthand version, in the interest of time, is they like to aggressively wait for the phone to ring. That is their go-to-market approach. I am a known expert and people should just call me, right? Which of course means that they're pulled into a lot of RFPs, and clients force them to compete on price quite a bit. You've got confidants. Confidants are kind of old school trusted advisors. They build a handful of very deep client relationships and then basically mine those relationships for follow-on work for years and years and years. They build those great relationships off the back of great work, exceptional and very responsive client service. They also have sharp elbows internally because I've built these deep client relationships. I don't like making introductions to the others in the firm. These are my clients, not the firm's clients.
Yeah, audit partners and accounting firms.
There you go. So the next ones are activators. So from the title of the book, they're the winning profile. But these folks are like super connectors. They're very active on LinkedIn. They're very active at events. They're building robust professional networks, and then they harvest from those networks new business. The way they do it is a little Challenger-like. So what they're doing is not aggressively waiting for the phone to ring, They're bringing new ideas to their clients. Hey, John, I don't, maybe you're the head of tax in your company. I don't know if you saw the tax court decision in this jurisdiction you operate in, but I think it might represent an opportunity for your business. Let's hop on a call and talk about it. What I'm trying to do is shape your understanding of the idea so that and actually earn some goodwill. And by the way, because this is a black box purchase and you can't demo it, and we've never worked together before, this 30 minutes we spent together will give you a chance to kick the tires on my chops as an advisor and a consultant in this area. The last thing I'll say about the activator is that unlike the confidant who boxes people out, these folks look to bring their colleagues in. They're very other focused. They're trying to create more points of connection between my firm and the client organization. And you'll hear them talk about this. I want the client not just to be loyal to me, but to the we of the firm. Then you've got debaters. In debaters, interestingly, when I would describe these folks in the article, they come across as the challenger. They're provocative. They want to reframe the client's own understanding of what's the right answer for their business, tipping my middle a little bit to the results. They don't do particularly well. And this was interesting to us because, again, what it told us is services businesses are really unique. You can be a challenger and you can be a bit contrarian and a bit of a pain kind of to your customer if you're selling a widget. But if you are the widget, if you are the product, that's a tough posture to adopt with your client. Now, again, remember, the activator is bringing insights too. So there's a little bit of overlap between challenger there, but stylistically, challenging in professional services needs to be done with extreme care. And then the last thing I'll say is, or the last one is the realist. The realist profile is the truthful, above board, transparent, ethical broker with the client, which of course you want every services client-facing partner to be. But these folks do it almost to a fault. So it's all about what can't be done, how much things are really going to cost, how long things will really take.
Sounds terrible.
Yeah. So clients, they want their partners to be a bit more aspirational than that. When we look at these folks in terms of performance, what we find in a nutshell is that while you can be a top performer pursuing any of those 5 paths as a partner, the most dominant profile when you look at high performers is that activator profile. Activators have a real commitment to business development. It's part of their daily workflow. It's not the thing they get to when it doesn't get crowded out by client work. They connect broadly and deeply, building those robust networks we talk about, and then they create value for clients, bringing ideas proactively to clients. So this is what I would tell your listeners in the services space is it's probably Challenger is a great resource to understand the broad landscape of B2B buying. And it's also valuable and instructive for us to understand what the best salespeople are doing. Then I would tell you to take a look at this activator research because it's going to give you the lens through which you might interpret some of that Challenger work. And what I'd tell you as well is if you are running a advisory, people-heavy, assets going up and down the elevator every day kind of business, you got to be careful about the way you challenge customers, and you want to think about how can we do more of that activator motion. So that's actually what a lot of the work is that we do with clients. We're out there teaching partners around the world how to be activators and how to leverage their professional networks to turn it into paying client relationships.
Love it. And I'm super grateful for you spending as much time as you have with us. I know you're a worldwide expert on this topic, so this is amazing. I'm going to point our listeners to the Harvard Business Review article, the name of which is The Activator.
It's what today's rainmakers do differently. The star in that is The Activator, though, and in the book will probably be called The Activator Way. We'll see how that turns out.
And that comes out when?
Spring of 2025.
Got it. And so if people want to learn about you, follow you, get in touch with you, can you point people to the best place to do that?
Yeah, a great place to check us out is the firm website, dcminsights.com. And check me out on LinkedIn as well. Love connecting with folks who hear me on shows like this one. Tell me you heard me on John's show and you want to be connected. If you have a follow-up question, feel free to hit me up.
That's awesome. And we'll put all of Matt's contact information in the show notes at builttosell.com. Matt, thanks for doing this.
Great seeing you again, John.